It was just another typical day at the local grocery store, or so it seemed. The sound of shopping carts rolling, the hum of fluorescent lights above, and the chatter of people going about their errands, everything appeared calm. But for one shopper, things were about to take a sudden and unexpected turn. Little did they know, an encounter with a woman who had a reputation for causing trouble was about to unfold, a woman whose behavior would set off a series of events no one could have predicted. You've seen it before, the type of person who feels entitled to police others, the one who thinks they can control the situation just because they don't like something or someone. A person who would rather escalate a conflict than walk away. And when a shopper, minding their own business, casually walked past her in an aisle, it didn't take long before the woman decided to act. It wasn't just an uncomfortable glance or an awkward comment, it was the kind of move that would make anyone's stomach drop. Without hesitation, she picked up her phone and dialed 911, accusing the shopper of doing something they hadn't done. She was already preparing herself for the drama. The showdown she was sure would come from calling the authorities on a suspicious person. But what she didn't know was that the real drama was about to unfold in ways she never expected. The shopper, now the target of her accusations, wasn't the person she thought them to be. And karma was about to make an appearance. As the tension in the store grew, the other shoppers began to notice what was happening. Some were confused, others uncomfortable, and a few, perhaps, were already forming opinions on what was really going on. The woman continued to speak into her phone, loudly and dramatically, painting a picture of a scenario that was far from the truth. Meanwhile, the shopper remained calm, unfazed, but with a quiet resolve that suggested this wouldn't be the first time they had been wrongly accused of something. And then, as if by fate, the situation took a turn. The shopper, who had been holding their ground, suddenly realized that the person they were dealing with had no idea what they were about to face. Because what happened next wasn't just a simple confrontation, it was a wake-up call, a moment of clarity that would change everything for the woman who thought she could manipulate the situation in her favor. But here's where the story gets really interesting. This wasn't the end of the drama. In fact, it was only the beginning. Because while the woman was busy making calls, the true nature of the situation began to reveal itself. As the authorities arrived and the shopper calmly told their side of the story, the truth started to come to light in a way no one had expected. The tables were about to turn, and karma was getting ready to strike in a way that would leave everyone in the store speechless. But did the woman learn her lesson? Or was there more to come? What would happen when the truth was finally uncovered? The suspense hung in the air, and the rest of the story was about to unfold in ways that would leave everyone questioning just how far a person's assumptions can take them, and what happens when they make the wrong call. Stay tuned, because what happens next will leave you shocked and amazed. As the woman continued to bark into her phone, her voice growing louder with each passing second, the grocery store's aisles seemed to close in. The shopper, still standing motionless, appeared to be the picture of composure, but inside, they could feel their heart racing. They had been in this situation before, being wrongly accused, judged by someone who thought they had the right to dictate how others should behave. But it didn't make it any easier. In fact, it was a constant reminder of how unfairly they had been treated in the past. But this time, they weren't going to let it slide. This time, something was different. The woman didn't seem to care about what anyone else thought. She wasn't bothered by the looks she was receiving from other customers, the confused glances from the store's employees, or even the growing tension in the air. She was in her element now. She had made the call. In her mind, the situation was already resolved. The police would arrive soon, and that would be the end of it. It didn't matter that she was wrong. It didn't matter that she had made an assumption based on nothing but her own prejudice. In her eyes, she had the power to control the narrative, to decide who was right and who was wrong. But she wasn't prepared for the twist that was about to unravel her entire perception. The shopper, however, wasn't just standing there passively. They were paying attention to every detail, every shift in the woman's demeanor, every glance cast by the other shoppers. They knew this wasn't just about a false accusation, it was about something much bigger. It was about standing up to injustice, about showing that, even in the face of adversity, silence could be powerful. They stood there, still and silent, refusing to give in to the frustration bubbling inside them. They wouldn't let this woman get away with trying to control the situation. What the woman didn't realize, though, was that her phone call had set off a chain of events that were already working against her. The shopper wasn't just another innocent bystander. They weren't someone who would back down or accept false accusations. They had a story to tell, one that would expose the truth, not just for themselves, but for anyone else who had ever been the target of unfair judgment. The tension was palpable now. Every few seconds, the woman would look at the shopper, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. She was trying to make them flinch, trying to force a reaction, but it wasn't working. The shopper remained calm, cool, collected, and completely in control. But that didn't mean they weren't prepared for what was coming next. The store was starting to feel like a pressure cooker. Every moment felt stretched to its limit. And then, just as the woman's grip on her phone tightened, a sudden movement caught the shopper's eye. It was one of the employees, an older man with a gray beard, approaching from the back of the store. He wasn't walking toward the confrontation directly, but he was getting closer. The shopper knew this was a crucial moment. If the employee got any closer, the woman would likely feel emboldened, perhaps even more certain of her decision to call the police. They needed to act, but the question was, how? In that split second, the shopper decided they weren't going to wait around to see how things would play out. They had seen enough in their life to understand when things were going south fast. It was time to take control of the situation. Without saying a word, they calmly turned to the employee and made a small gesture toward the woman. The man hesitated for just a moment, but when he saw the seriousness in the shopper's eyes, he nodded slightly and began walking in the other direction, presumably to fetch the manager. The shopper couldn't help but notice how the woman's eyes flickered with irritation when the employee didn't respond as she expected. There was a brief moment where the two women locked eyes, and in that silent exchange, the tension reached its peak. The woman was frustrated now, clearly taken aback by the lack of support from the other shoppers, who were beginning to notice the growing commotion. It was clear to everyone that the woman had a personal vendetta against the shopper, but for some reason, no one was willing to take her side. In fact, more and more people were turning their attention toward her, no longer just passive bystanders, but witnesses to her actions. But the woman wasn't backing down. As soon as the employee was out of sight, she took a step forward, her voice rising in volume as she continued her phone call. She was no longer worried about who was listening. She was convinced that if she pushed hard enough, someone would believe her. That's when the unexpected happened. The store's security cameras had been quietly recording the entire encounter, and they had captured everything: the woman's accusation, the shopper's calm demeanor, and even the looks of confusion from the other customers. It wasn't long before the store manager was on the scene, and with him, a security guard. The woman, already well into her monologue with the 911 operator, wasn't even aware of their arrival. The manager, a middle-aged man with a neutral expression, walked up to the woman and spoke in a calm voice. "Ma'am, we've been informed about the situation. Can you please tell me what's going on?" The woman barely acknowledged him, her attention still focused entirely on the phone in her hand. "I'm telling you, this person, this man, he's been following me, stalking me. I want him arrested. He's making me feel unsafe." The manager glanced at the shopper, who was still standing there, just a few feet away, not moving, not reacting to the accusation. "I see," he said, his voice still measured. "Do you have any evidence of this, ma'am? Because we've been watching the cameras, and we haven't seen anything unusual. Maybe we should talk to the people who've witnessed this." The woman faltered for just a second, her confidence wavering. She wasn't expecting any resistance. She was used to people agreeing with her, to giving her the benefit of the doubt. But here, in this moment, things weren't going according to her plan. The people around her were starting to doubt her story, and she could feel it. She tried to regain control, her voice rising again, but the manager calmly stepped forward, signaling to the security guard to watch the footage. The room grew even quieter as the tension in the air intensified. The manager stood there, waiting for the response, while the woman's face turned red with frustration. The shopper could feel the eyes of the room on them now. They weren't just in a store anymore, they were at the center of a storm that was about to hit its peak. And the question on everyone's mind was simple: who was telling the truth? The woman's accusations, or the shopper's silence? But as the manager turned toward the security guard to check the footage, a phone rang. The ring was loud in the silence of the store, and everyone looked up in surprise. It was the woman's phone, still held firmly in her hand. But this wasn't a call from 911. This was something else entirely. Something that would change everything. The woman glanced down at the screen, her eyes widening as she saw the name flashing across it. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a split second, all the bravado she had been displaying evaporated. The shopper noticed this change, and the realization hit them: something was about to happen that none of them expected. The woman answered the phone quickly, her voice shaky now. "Hello?" she said, her tone no longer confident but rather anxious. The moment she spoke, the entire atmosphere shifted. The manager, the security guard, and even the other shoppers held their breath, waiting to see how this call would affect the unfolding drama. The woman listened for a moment, her expression changing rapidly from confusion to disbelief. The shopper watched closely, their instincts telling them that whatever was happening on the other end of the line was going to turn this entire situation on its head. But what was it? What could possibly make this woman so rattled? And what did it have to do with the confrontation she had started just moments before? The suspense hung in the air like a thick fog. No one knew what was coming next, but one thing was certain: the truth was about to come to light. And when it did, it would be far more complicated than anyone could have imagined. The woman's eyes were fixed on the phone screen, her hand trembling slightly as she held the receiver to her ear. The tension in the store had shifted. It wasn't just the manager or the security guard who was watching her now. Every eye in the store was on her, waiting for something to break, waiting for her to explain what had just thrown her off balance. The woman was completely thrown off course now, her earlier confidence gone, replaced by a look of confusion and concern. The phone call was short, only a few seconds, but it was enough to rattle her. As she ended the call, she quickly turned her head to the manager, her voice now much softer than it had been moments before. I need to speak to someone." "It's a private matter," she said, her words faltering, a sharp contrast to the accusatory tone she had used just moments ago. She was no longer the same person who had so confidently dialed 911, determined to paint the shopper as the villain. The manager, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, looked at the security guard. "Take a walk around the store, make sure everything is all right," he said, his voice calm but firm. The guard nodded and stepped away, his eyes still flicking over to the woman as he moved down the aisle. The room fell into a strange, pregnant silence. The woman glanced around as though searching for an escape, and the shopper couldn't help but wonder what had just happened on the other end of that phone call. Had she just been caught in a lie? Did she know something they didn't? The shift in her demeanor wasn't just unsettling, it was a sign that something deeper was at play, something that neither the shopper nor anyone else could have predicted. But just as quickly as the moment had arrived, the woman's composure returned. She straightened her shoulders, though the nervous edge was still there, lingering beneath the surface. She glanced at the shopper again, her eyes hardening once more. "I've been harassed," she said, her voice now filled with a mix of frustration and defiance. "I want this person removed from the store." I'm not going to let someone like this get away with it. The shopper stood still, taking in every word, but still refusing to react. In their mind, they were already moving past this. The woman's accusations were starting to feel less like a threat and more like a desperate attempt to salvage control over a situation she had no grip on. But what was her real motive? Why had she resorted to calling the police over a simple misunderstanding? It didn't add up, and something about the whole situation felt off. A few customers stood nearby, whispering amongst themselves. The murmurs grew louder, a mixture of confusion and curiosity, but no one spoke out loud. Everyone was waiting for the next shoe to drop. The woman's voice continued to carry, but now it lacked conviction, as if she were trying to convince herself more than anyone else. Behind the scenes, the store manager was making a quiet call of his own. The shopper couldn't hear the conversation, but they saw the subtle change in the manager's expression as he spoke. Whatever was happening, it wasn't something the woman was prepared for. Minutes passed, but the tension felt as though it had frozen in place. The woman's attitude had shifted, but so had the store's atmosphere. The store was no longer just a place where people shopped for groceries. It had become a courtroom, with every person in the store acting as a silent witness to what could become a very public spectacle. And then, just as the silence became unbearable, the door to the back office opened, and the manager stepped forward with a solemn look on his face. He addressed the woman, his tone calm but authoritative. "We've reviewed the footage, and from what we can see, your claims don't match up with what actually happened. We also spoke to some of the customers who were here during the incident, and they've confirmed that the situation was not what you described." The woman's face strained of color as she absorbed his words. For the first time, she seemed at a loss for what to say. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her posture slumped, and she took a step back, suddenly aware that the power she thought she had was slipping away. The manager continued, his voice unwavering. "I'm afraid we're going to have to ask you to leave the premises. You can either leave peacefully, or we'll have to involve law enforcement. But know this, any further attempts to escalate this situation will only make matters worse." It was clear to everyone in the store that the woman was in no position to argue. She looked around, her eyes darting from one person to another, but no one was willing to come to her defense. The shopper stood frozen, watching as the woman struggled to maintain her dignity. It was almost as if the entire store had turned against her, revealing the truth that was buried beneath her accusations. The woman opened her mouth again, this time to speak, but her voice faltered. She glanced at the shopper one last time, her gaze now a mixture of anger and desperation. You don't understand," she muttered, but her words were hollow, and even she seemed to know it. The shopper's heart rate slowed as they absorbed the sight of the woman now shrinking before them. It wasn't just the accusation that had rattled her, it was the realization that she had underestimated the situation, that she had tried to manipulate her way into control but had failed. Her own emotions were betraying her now, and she was no longer able to maintain the mask she had worn. In the midst of this chaos, something deeper began to emerge. The real issue at hand wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't just about a false accusation. The woman's behavior was the symptom of a larger problem, a problem that ran deeper than one store, one incident. It was about fear, power, and control. She had acted out of a desire to preserve her own comfort, her own sense of security, and when that was challenged, she lashed out. But the shopper wasn't interested in revenge. They didn't feel a sense of satisfaction watching her squirm. Instead, they felt a deep, unsettling sadness because this wasn't just one person's story. It was part of a much larger, much darker narrative that played out time and time again in small, quiet ways that no one talked about. Still, the woman wasn't done. She wasn't going to walk away quietly, not after everything she had tried to put in motion. As the manager moved to escort her out, she grabbed her purse tightly and looked back at the shopper one last time. "You'll regret this," she said under her breath, just loud enough for the shopper to hear. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. The woman's words hung in the air, a final threat, a final attempt to regain control. The shopper, however, remained unmoved. They knew this wasn't over, not yet. Whatever this woman had tried to accomplish, there was still more to uncover, more to understand. And as the woman was escorted from the store, the shopper couldn't shake the feeling that this incident was just the tip of the iceberg. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, and the store seemed to exhale a collective breath. But the weight of the moment lingered. It wasn't just the end of an argument, it was the beginning of something much larger. The conflict between the shopper and the woman was far from resolved. In fact, the deeper truths were still hidden beneath the surface, and the real story was only just beginning to unfold. The store had fallen into an uneasy calm after the woman was escorted out. Shoppers resumed their activities, but the air still felt thick with tension. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights above, the clink of carts, and the murmur of voices couldn't mask the heaviness in the room. The manager stood near the front, talking quietly with the security guard, while the shopper lingered near the aisle, still processing what had just happened. It didn't feel finished. Not by a long shot. The woman's words echoed in the shopper's mind, "You'll regret this." The threat wasn't just an offhand remark. There was something in the way she said it, something in the way her eyes had glinted with a mixture of fury and desperation. It was as if she knew something the shopper didn't. As if, in the chaos of the moment, there was still a card left to play that no one had seen coming. But what was it? What did she know that could change everything? The thought gnawed at the shopper, but they couldn't afford to let their guard down. Not now. The minutes ticked by, but the suspense in the store only grew thicker. The shoppers who had witnessed the scene were talking among themselves in hushed tones. No one knew the full story, but everyone could sense that there was more to this than met the eye. The manager had remained calm, composed, but even he couldn't hide the unease that lingered in his expression. He kept checking his phone, glancing at the door, as though waiting for something to happen. The shopper turned their attention back to the exit, the door where the woman had been escorted through. What was going to happen next? They couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that the woman wouldn't simply walk away, humiliated and defeated. There was something deeper at play, something that was about to come crashing back into the store, with consequences no one could predict. As they stood there, lost in thought, the store's front door suddenly opened again. The shopper tensed, their heart rate spiking as they turned to see who had walked in. It wasn't the woman, it was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a tense expression on his face. His eyes scanned the room quickly, locking onto the manager and the security guard. He was dressed in a sharp suit, the kind of attire that suggested authority. But it wasn't his clothes that made the shopper's stomach drop, it was the air of urgency that surrounded him, the kind of presence that made people instinctively take a step back. The man made a beeline for the manager. There was no introduction, no pleasantries. "You need to clear the store," he said, his voice low but firm, his eyes never leaving the manager's face. The manager hesitated for a moment, clearly thrown off guard by the man's sudden appearance. "What do you mean?" "The store is open. It's just a regular." "This is not a request," the man interrupted, his tone colder now. "Clear the store. Now." The shopper stood frozen, their eyes flicking between the two men, trying to make sense of what was happening. The air felt charged again, the calm that had settled earlier completely evaporating. The manager nodded slowly, clearly uncomfortable, but he didn't argue. He moved toward the store's intercom system, speaking into it in a voice that was barely audible to the shopper. Moments later, the overhead speakers crackled, and the message echoed through the store, "Attention, all customers, please proceed to the front registers. We are closing for a short time for an emergency. Thank you for your cooperation." Confusion spread like wildfire through the aisles. Shoppers looked at each other, their expressions mirroring the growing sense of unease. Some began to shuffle toward the front, but others lingered, unsure of what was happening. The shopper, still trying to piece everything together, felt their heart begin to race again. What emergency? Why were they closing the store suddenly? The man, who had been standing silently by the manager, finally spoke again. "It's best if you leave. All of you. The situation is escalating." His voice was almost like a command now, and the intensity in his eyes made it clear that this was no ordinary emergency. The shoppers' instincts kicked in. They didn't know who this man was, but something about him felt wrong. He didn't belong in the store. He wasn't part of the usual crowd. And the way he carried himself, with such authority, was a red flag. They glanced around, looking for anyone else who might have an explanation, but everyone was too busy trying to leave. The sense of fear was palpable now, and the tension in the air was suffocating. It was like everyone had caught on that something was off, but no one knew exactly what. The shopper was about to turn and leave when a thought hit them. The woman. What if she had known about this? What if she had set this in motion? There was no way this man was a coincidence. Not after everything that had happened. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. With the store now practically empty, the shopper made their move. They slipped through the aisles, trying to stay out of sight, their eyes glued to the man and the manager as they spoke quietly near the entrance. The man's voice was muffled, but the words report and escalate floated through the air, confirming the shopper's suspicion. Something had happened, something big, and it was unfolding in real time. They had to get closer, had to know exactly what was going on before it was too late. With the store almost empty and the man distracted, the shopper quickly made their way toward the back office, where the manager had been earlier. They ducked behind a display, keeping as quiet as possible. The office door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, they could see the manager and the man inside, speaking in low, urgent tones. The shopper's heart skipped a beat when they noticed something on the desk. In plain sight was a file, the top sheet clearly visible. It was stamped in bold red letters, "Confidential." They didn't have much time. They knew they had to act quickly, before anyone noticed they were there. The shopper slipped into the office, moving quietly, as if every step could make or break the moment. They reached the desk, their fingers grazing the file. They barely had time to scan the words before they heard footsteps approaching the office door. They froze. In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. The door to the office was about to open, and if they didn't act now, they might be caught. The file was too important. It was the key to understanding why the store had been shut down, why this man was here, and how deep the woman's involvement really went. But before they could make a decision, the door creaked open, and the voice of the man echoed through the small space. "What are you doing here?" The shopper's breath caught in their throat. They were trapped. The words hung in the air like a thick fog, the sound of the man's voice reverberating off the walls of the small office. The shopper's heart raced, and for a split second, everything went still. They couldn't move, couldn't speak. Every instinct screamed at them to run, to hide, to do anything to escape the inevitable confrontation that was coming. But it was too late for that. The man had already seen them, and there was no turning back now. The door creaked open wider, and the shopper's body tensed, preparing for what was to come. But instead of the expected shout or forceful demand for them to leave, the man's eyes narrowed, a flicker of recognition flashing across his face. It wasn't anger or surprise, but something far more unsettling, something that made the shopper's skin crawl. "You're the one from the store earlier," the man said, his voice low and calculated, as if this moment had been building for a long time. The shopper couldn't help but feel a chill run down their spine. How did he know? The shopper's mind raced. They had never seen this man before today. But the way he spoke, The way he seemed to know everything that had happened suggested something more, something deeper was at play here. The connection between the woman and the man was becoming clearer now, but what did it mean? Before they could respond, the man stepped into the room fully, closing the door behind him with a deliberate click. His demeanor was calm, but there was a dangerous edge to his presence, one that made the shopper's heart pound faster. He wasn't just a stranger. He was part of something larger, something bigger than a simple dispute over a misunderstanding. And it was becoming painfully obvious that they were tangled in the middle of it all. "You've been involved in something far more serious than you realize," the man continued, his tone unwavering. "This isn't just about some false accusation or a petty conflict. You're in the middle of a much bigger game, one that's been set in motion long before you ever walked into that store." The shopper felt a knot tighten in their stomach. A bigger game? What did that even mean? They had thought it was just about a woman making a scene, a call to the police, a few moments of tension. But now, with this man standing in front of them, everything felt so much darker. The walls of the small office suddenly seemed to close in on them, the weight of the situation pressing down like an invisible force. The man took a slow step closer, his eyes never leaving the shopper's face. "You're not just a bystander. You're part of something that's about to spiral out of control. And whether you like it or not, you have a role to play in this." The words hit like a punch to the gut. A role to play? The shopper didn't know what this man was talking about. They had just come to the store to pick up a few items, to get through their day like any other. They weren't supposed to be part of some grand scheme, some elaborate plot. They were just trying to live their life, to survive in a world that didn't always make sense. But now, it seemed that everything had been turned upside down in an instant. Before the shopper could speak, the man raised a hand, silencing them. "Don't try to deny it. You've already seen too much. I know about your involvement with the woman earlier. You think she was just some random customer? Think again. She's been orchestrating this entire situation, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. You were always meant to be here, to witness this. Your presence wasn't an accident, it was planned." The shopper's mind spun, trying to piece together the fragments of information that the man was dropping. It was all happening too fast, too overwhelming for them to fully comprehend. But one thing was certain, the situation had escalated far beyond what they had imagined. The stakes were higher, the dangers more real than ever before. But then came the twist. The man's eyes flicked to the desk, where the file lay. The same file the shopper had almost opened moments before. It seemed like the man's attention had been momentarily drawn away, just enough for the shopper to think about making a move. But they knew they couldn't risk it. The file could hold answers they desperately needed, but it also held the potential to drag them even further into this web of uncertainty. The man turned back to them, his expression unreadable. "You think you have the upper hand, don't you? You think you're in control now because you've caught a glimpse of the truth. But you're wrong. You're not. You're just another pawn, a piece on the board that you don't fully understand." The shopper felt a surge of frustration rise within them. Pawn? They weren't a pawn. They weren't some insignificant part of a game. They were just a person trying to make sense of this mess. But the more the man spoke, the more the lines between truth and deception blurred. The more questions piled up without answers. The door handle rattled suddenly, and both the shopper and the man froze. Someone was coming. The tension escalated, thickening the air around them. Was it the manager? Had he caught wind of what was happening inside? Or was it someone else, someone more dangerous, someone involved in this twisted game? The man's expression hardened, and without warning, he lunged toward the desk, grabbing the file. His movements were quick and precise, as if he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. The shopper instinctively stepped back, heart racing. But the man didn't seem to notice they were too focused on what was inside that file, flipping through the pages rapidly as though searching for something specific. "What's in that file?" the shopper demanded, unable to contain the curiosity and anxiety bubbling inside them. The man didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a small document from the folder, glancing at it quickly before shoving it into his pocket. He then turned his gaze back to the shopper, his eyes cold and calculating. "You're in deeper than you think. Don't follow me." Before the shopper could react, the door to the office burst open, and the manager walked in, his face tight with anxiety. "We have to move now," he said urgently. The man didn't hesitate. He was already halfway out the door, glancing back over his shoulder. "This isn't over," he muttered. "Not by a long shot." The manager looked at the shopper, his face pale. "You need to leave now." Confusion swirled in the shopper's mind. Leave? What was happening? What was going on? But it was clear that the time for answers had passed. The chaos was only just beginning, and the path forward was one they could no longer avoid. The tension was too thick to cut through, and they had no choice but to follow the orders. But as they moved toward the door, the reality of their situation hit them hard. Whatever had been set in motion was far from over, and the worst was yet to come. The shopper moved toward the door, their mind racing. Every instinct told them to run, to get as far away from this place as possible, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they were too deep now. No matter how fast they left, they would never escape the mess that had somehow pulled them into its tangled web. The manager was already ushering them toward the exit, but the unease in his eyes suggested that he, too, was trying to outrun something far bigger than what he could handle. The doors to the store slid open, and the cool night air hit the shopper's face, but it did little to calm their nerves. Outside, the parking lot was eerily empty, the usual hum of traffic and chatter silenced as if the whole world had decided to hold its breath. The man in the suit was gone, but the tension lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. The shopper turned to look back at the store, feeling a deep unease settle in their chest. They weren't safe. Not yet. The manager's voice cut through the silence. "You need to go. Now." "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's really going on," the shopper demanded, their voice more forceful than they intended. "Who was that man? What's in the file? Why did you call the police earlier? This is bigger than what you're letting on. I deserve to know what's happening." The manager's eyes darted around, as if he were weighing whether to tell the truth or keep quiet. Finally, he let out a long, exhausted sigh. "You've already seen too much. You don't get it. Do you? It's not just some random accident. You were always part of the plan." The shopper's breath caught in their throat. "What plan?" The manager shook his head. "The woman in the store? She's not who you think she is. She's part of a larger operation, a group that's been pulling strings all around the city. The file you saw, it's all about control. Influence. And you've been caught right in the middle." The words hit like a slap to the face. The shopper took a step back, struggling to process what the manager had just revealed. It felt impossible. They had thought everything was just an unfortunate misunderstanding, a case of a rude customer trying to cause trouble. But now, everything had shifted, and the reality of the situation was more dangerous than they could have imagined. "We were just a small piece of their plan," the manager continued, his voice shaky. "I didn't know what to do. The police were called because they were manipulating the situation to get us to act. But they have connections, power. If you get too close to the truth, they won't hesitate to silence you." The shopper's mind spun as the pieces began to fall into place. The woman, the strange man in the store, the police, everything had been orchestrated to pull them into this tangled mess. But why? Why were they the target? And what was in that file that made them so important? Just then, a black SUV rolled up to the curb, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a predator on the hunt. The manager's eyes widened in alarm. "We need to go. Now." Before the shopper could respond, the doors to the SUV flew open, and two men in dark suits stepped out. They moved with purpose, scanning the area as they approached. One of them, the taller one, locked eyes with the shopper, his expression cold and unreadable. "Move," the man ordered. There was no question, no hesitation in his voice. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. The manager stepped in front of the shopper, blocking their path. "You can't do this. I've told you everything. Just let us go." The tall man didn't flinch. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, unmarked envelope. "You don't get to walk away from this. Not anymore." The shopper's mind raced, 1,000 thoughts colliding in an instant. Who were these people? What were they trying to protect? The envelope, the file, was it something so dangerous that they had to eliminate everyone who got close to it? Without warning, the tall man shoved the envelope into the manager's hands. "Take it. And don't ever speak about it again. You're done here." The manager's face paled as he stared at the envelope, his hands trembling. The tension between them was palpable, a silent standoff, as if everything had come down to this one moment. Finally, the manager nodded, a defeated look crossing his face. He turned to the shopper, his expression full of regret. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't want this for you. I never thought it would go this far. But now you're a part of it too. There's no turning back." Before the shopper could respond, the tall man grabbed the manager by the arm and pulled him toward the SUV. The other man stayed behind, watching the shopper with an unsettling calm. It was as if they were just waiting for the right moment to strike. The feeling of danger was suffocating now, every nerve in the shopper's body screaming at them to run. The SUV doors slammed shut, and the vehicle sped off into the night, disappearing into the shadows. The shopper stood there, frozen in the parking lot, their thoughts spinning. The truth had come crashing down, but it still didn't make sense. What was the file? What had the manager been involved in? And most importantly, what role had the shopper unknowingly played? As the silence settled over the lot, the shopper's phone buzzed in their pocket. With trembling hands, they pulled it out and checked the message that had just come through. It was from an unknown number. "I know you're still wondering what all of this means. But you haven't seen the full picture yet. The real game is about to begin, and you're already in it. Stay tuned. The truth is closer than you think." The message sent a cold shiver down their spine. Who was this? And why were they sending this now, after everything had happened? The weight of the words sank in, and the shopper felt a surge of dread wash over them. There was no way to escape this, no way to outrun the storm that had been set in motion. Suddenly, a thought struck them with such force that they nearly stumbled. The woman, the one who had started it all, had known something. She had been the key, the catalyst that set this whole chain of events in motion. And now, the shopper was stuck in the middle of it, with no way out. As the night air grew colder, the shopper stood there, holding their phone tightly in their hand, staring into the darkness, knowing that whatever was coming next would change everything. The game had just begun and they were already in too deep to back out now. The truth was closer than they thought, but so was the danger. And the worst part? They still didn't know who to trust. The next few days felt like a blur. The shopper couldn't escape the feeling of being watched, that haunting sense of being part of something much larger than they had ever anticipated. Every step they took felt calculated, as though the very air around them was thick with suspicion. The message they had received from the unknown number kept echoing in their mind: "The truth is closer than you think." No matter how hard they tried to push it away, the truth clawed at them. They had been a pawn, manipulated without even realizing it. They had been caught in the crossfire of an invisible war, a war that wasn't just about money or power, but control. And now, after everything that had happened, they couldn't turn back. The file. The envelope. The strange man and his cryptic warnings. Every piece of the puzzle was still scattered, and the picture they were forming made their stomach churn. But now, there was a new urgency, a new resolve. They couldn't just sit back and let everything slip through their fingers. They had to understand what had happened, to find out the full extent of what they had been dragged into. They began retracing their steps, visiting the store again, hoping that somehow, something would trigger a memory, or at least offer a clue. But when they arrived, the place was almost empty, save for the employees cleaning up after the day's shift. The manager was nowhere to be seen, and it seemed like nothing had ever happened. It was as if the whole ordeal had been erased, wiped clean from everyone's memory. But the shopper couldn't shake the feeling that they had left behind something vital, something important. They spent hours going over everything in their mind, trying to put together a timeline, a sequence of events that could explain it all. After a few days of restless searching, the shopper finally managed to track down someone who might know more: the woman from the store. The one who had set the whole chain of events into motion. They had tried to avoid thinking about her, tried to push the memory of her out of their mind, but now, it seemed like the only way forward was to confront her directly. They found her at a small apartment on the edge of the city. The building was old, rundown, a place where secrets could easily be kept hidden. They knocked on the door with a sense of trepidation, unsure of what they would find. When the door opened, the woman stood there, looking almost exactly as she had in the store, composed, confident, yet with something unsettling about her. "You," she said, her eyes narrowing. "I wondered when you would come." The shopper felt their heart skip a beat. She knew? Of course she knew. She had been orchestrating everything from the start. But why? What did she want from them? "I don't know what you want from me, but I need answers," the shopper said, trying to keep their voice steady. "What happened in that store? Who are you really? Why did you call the police? Why did you—" "Enough," she interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You're asking the wrong questions." The shopper froze, taken aback by her tone. It was as if she had been expecting this moment all along. "You've been part of a larger plan," she continued, her gaze never leaving the shopper's eyes. "And I'm not here to explain it to you. You wouldn't understand. What you need to know is that you were never just a victim, never just an innocent bystander. You were a part of something much bigger." The shopper clenched their fists, the weight of her words hitting harder than they expected. "A part of what? What is this all about?" The woman smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was a smile that made the shopper's blood run cold. "Power. Control. Manipulation. You're in the middle of a network, people who control things from behind the scenes. They pull the strings, make the moves, and no one even knows they're there. Not until it's too late." The words settled into the shopper's chest like a stone, cold and heavy. This wasn't just about one woman causing trouble at a store. This wasn't some isolated incident. This was far more complicated, far more dangerous. "Why me?" the shopper asked. "Why did you target me?" The woman's eyes flickered for a moment, something almost resembling guilt crossing her face. But it was gone just as quickly as it appeared. "You weren't targeted. You were chosen. The moment you walked into that store, you became part of a much larger game. You were a piece on the board, just like everyone else." The shoppers shook their head, confusion clouding their thoughts. "And the file? The man? What was that all about?" She stepped back, as if considering whether to reveal more. "That file contained information about someone much more important than you realize. someone who's been in control for years. The people behind this operation, behind everything, are untouchable. But you were a loose end. You started asking questions, getting too close to the truth. That's why I had to make sure you stayed on the sidelines. The shopper's mind reeled as everything fell into place. The file, the police, the strange man, it had all been part of a bigger plan to keep them from discovering something they weren't supposed to see. And now, it seemed like they had uncovered too much. You want me to just walk away? The shopper demanded, their voice rising. After all of this? You can't be serious. The woman's gaze softened slightly, as if she understood the weight of the decision they were being forced to make. You don't have a choice. If you push any further, you'll never be able to escape. There are people watching you, controlling your every move. You think you're safe, but you're not. The moment you started asking questions, you became a target. It was clear that she wasn't lying. The shopper's gut told them that everything she said was true. The deeper they dug, the darker the world became. They had never imagined that a simple trip to the store could pull them into a conspiracy so vast, so dangerous. But now, they understood. They couldn't ignore it anymore. They were part of something bigger than themselves, and no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't escape it. The shopper stood there for a long moment, processing everything that had been said. It was too much to take in, too much to understand. The woman was right, there was no going back. Whatever had happened, whatever was still coming, they were in it now. They couldn't just walk away. With a deep breath, the shopper looked the woman in the eye one last time. Then what do I do now? The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped aside, gesturing toward the open door behind her. You keep going. You keep living your life. But understand this, you're never going to be free of this. It's always going to be there, just beneath the surface, pulling the strings. And if you're lucky, you'll never find out just how deep it goes. With that, she closed the door, leaving the shopper standing there, stunned, unable to move. As they walked away, the weight of everything finally hit them. They were never going to be the same. The world they had once known, the life they had once lived, was gone. There was no going back to normal. No way to erase what they had learned. But as they stepped into the cold night air, one thought lingered in their mind: this was just the beginning. The game was far from over, and now, they had a role to play whether they liked it or not. And so, with a sense of grim acceptance, the shopper walked into the unknown, knowing that whatever came next, they would have to face it head on.